Ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to day two of Hyderabad Literary Festival 2021, which we are, of course, doing digitally. So, from the comfort of your homes, you can watch us. And this morning, we are beginning with an amazing session on the biography of Hariprasad Chaurasia. And with us this morning, ladies and gentlemen, is the author Sathya Saran. And in conversation with Sathya Saran would be Shantanu Ray Chaudhuri. And just to very quickly, you already have their profiles, but let me also give you very quickly a couple of lines about both Satya as well as Shantanu. So, Sathya Saran was the editor of Femina, and she was, in a way, responsible for turning that into a big brand. And Satya was the editor of Femina for 12 years. And currently, she is the consulting editor at Penguin Random House. And Sathya Saran has written biographies of several legends: Jagjit Singh, S.D. Burman, Guru Dutt, and now she has come out with this wonderful biography of Hariprasad Chaurasia. So this morning, Satya would be in conversation with Shantanu Ray Chaudhuri. Shantanu was with HarperCollins for many, many years, and he was particularly interested in books that are related to films, and he brought out many books that went on to win awards in film journalism and film writing. And currently, he is a freelancer. He writes on films, and he's also a poet with published books. And he commissioned several books on films, and he is an award-winning editor, publisher's editor. So we are delighted to welcome both of you, Satya and Shantanu, and welcome to Hyderabad Literary Festival. And this is a wonderful way to begin. I mean, what better way to begin a day than morning raga? So thank you very much, and we look forward to your session. And I will now disappear and come back after 35 minutes or so with audience questions. So when I reappear on the screen, it means that we are in the last 15 minutes of the session, right? Thank you very much once again, and over to you, Shantanu.
Thank you so much, Professor Kumar. It's been so good to be back at the festival. We interacted a few years back on a couple of books and brings back warm memories. And of course, to be here with Satya is a special sort of bonus for me. She's always been, we published to go back a long way, and this one's latest in a series of biographies we worked together. Thank you so much. It's wonderful to be here.
Great, Shantanu.
Yeah, so let's begin at the beginning, and with a personality like Panditji, and with the kind of history that he has, the kind of pioneering work that he has done in Indian classical music, fusion, international fusion music, and his gurukuls and all of that. What is it? That life is awesome. It's a huge sort of thing to So what was it? Was there something in particular that sort of drove you to want to tell this story? Or how daunting was that prospect of telling a life like Hariprasad Chaurasia Pandit?
I think what made me want this book to be written, not necessarily by me, was the fact that here is a man who has achieved so much, who is so well loved, who is practically a national treasure for us. And I said, how little we know about his life. I knew very little about his life myself. I knew he played the flute, he was a classical singer, a player, and he had learned from Annapurna Devi, but beyond that, nothing. You see? So I thought these are stories that need to be archived. These are stories that need to inspire future generations. Mm-hmm. And let's get this book done.
Yeah.
But the surprise was when it landed on my lap.
why do you think is this? Despite the fact of his stature, international stature, why do you think there was so little available about him as a person, about his work? And I'm sure one book can never do justice to the kind of so you have approach. We'll talk about that approach in the course of the discussion. But why do you think is this lack of material on him? In terms of
Well,
did you
there is
address
material.
that?
There is material on him, but it's not put together. There's not enough about his struggle. There's not enough about the years of his growth. We don't know anything much about his huge contribution to cinema music, to film music, or his struggle as a young man who was born into a wrestler's family, who had to, hide from his father, whose heavy hand he feared that he would get one across his cheek, which would take a long time to heal, while he wanted to indulge his love of music, or his huge journey of patience, while he struggled for 3 long years to learn from Annapurna Devi. I mean, we have glimpses of these things, but it's we don't chronicle people. We chronicle little events. We chronicle sensational stuff, but we never write about long journeys that are taken by geniuses and how they got to where they did. So I thought.
So like that, a couple of related questions. How daunting was the prospect, and something about the actual process of writing and researching. I'm sure you are in Bombay. He is in his,
Traveling.
like he's everywhere. He's traveling, he's teaching. Even at this age, he's traveling, he's teaching, he's giving concerts. So how daunting was the prospect of writing it, and secondly, the sort of a glimpse into the research and the process of writing that went on behind.
Well, when I was asked to write the book, I said, no, not me. We'll get someone who knows music thoroughly, who can, understand every nuance of what he's doing. And I was told, no, we don't want a musical treatise. We want a human biography. I said, that's something I can do. So let's go ahead and try this. But, in Sound of Music, they have this song, how do you hold a sunbeam in your hand? Well, that's who Hari Prasad is. He is here one day, there somewhere else. It's difficult to track him. But I started by reading this. There is a biography of him, which was written earlier, which has a lot of details about his earlier life, called Woodwinds of Change. I got permission from the author to read it and use it as one of my references. And keeping that as my sounding board, I started investigating news reports. Then I started following him. If he was performing anywhere, I was there, like his shadow, listening, because I had to imbibe his music, understand him as a person, see him off stage, on stage, see his interactions with people. So that was one more way I managed to do that. And his daughter-in-law and manager Pushpanjali was very, very helpful. Whenever there was something happening, she would intimate me. I would drop everything and go. Then I realized catching him here was difficult. So I went and camped in Bhubaneswar when he was there at his Gurukul for 3 days, and very graciously, very, very sweetly, he gave me 3 full days, the time I wanted. He just put everything on hold, and except for an occasional visitor who would drop in and he would say, "Dekhiye, main kaam kar raha hu. Please maaf kijiye," kind of thing. He gave me the time I wanted. There was also a little bit about his own scattered memory, because he's done so much. It's 80 plus years of life. So sometimes I had to pin him down, and there the reference books came in handy. So I think it was a lovely process, and I found myself doing nothing but listening to his flute.
Yeah. And do you think that kind of listening, you say that you didn't have that much in-depth awareness of that kind of about his music. Do you think in the time you got to develop the book or write the book, research the book, that kind of awareness you developed about his music? Was that, you know, was
Yes.
was that essential? Like, how essential was getting to know his music? Because you say that you did not want to write a musical treatise, so it was more to be about the man than his music. So, like, could you elaborate on that aspect of?
I think the man and his music are one. His
Yeah.
music shapes him and he shapes his music.
Mm,
So
mm,
I think listening to him and understanding the way he approached, like a prayer, it was like when you saw him on stage, it was like watching someone in meditation or
mm,
watching fragrance rising from an agarbatti. That is how the music used to fill the auditorium. And there was this, it was like you were in a sacred space. And I think
mm,
that gave me an understanding of who he was. For him, music is not performance,
mm,
it is an
mm.
offering.
Yeah.
And that shaped my writing to a large extent. His humility, his understanding of the audience, because he does understand his audience, he knows them, but he doesn't pander to them. He
Uh,
lifts them to his level. So even I, who normally am not, I'm more interested in words, in music. I'm not an instrumental lover, but I found myself enraptured. So I think that. And then there was one more thing which helped me is when I had to write about his molding his music to how Annapurna Devi wanted it in the Dhrupat tradition and how he added his own, modifications to that. To understand that he has, there is a volume of his teaching
okay.
written by his French pupil, and I got that copy and I read how he talks about the ragas and how he works with each raga, and there were little demonstrations, there were CDs to work. So I listened to all of that, and it really made things very simple for me.
So, we will talk about his life a bit, and you have a very, and then we'll sort of come to the structure of the book also. But, like, it's very, the way it's almost, the book also reads like you've picked up a piece of music from a larger piece, put it there, and then you have an interlude. So all of that will come to. So let's start at, you know, you begin the book with, saying, he was a good pupil, even if an unwilling one. You start with that, and then you go to the story of, his wrestler father. And so, can you please, it's a fascinating story about a young boy who wanted nothing but music, but was saddled with wrestling. Two different, absolutely, poles apart fields. So can you please sort of bring in our audiences into that aspect of his life?
So I think actually the music starts with the prelude. The book starts with the prelude.
Yeah.
Like an alap almost, but it's a tumultuous alap because it talks about the fact that he is performing at his Guruma's Shraddhanjali program, and he is the highlight of the program as the organizer with Shiv Kumar Sharma, and Shivji has to cover for him because he's not able to play. And he looks at, of course, I was there and it brought tears to my eyes to watch him attempting again and again and not being able to play. His breath would not let him play. The tones were coming out flat and he would give up and then he would pick it up again. And I imagined when he looked at the picture of his Guruma, he was asking her, why is this happening? Why am I not able to play at your Shraddhanjali event when I am offering my worship to you? Have I been a bad pupil? And of course it ends with his being taken to hospital and stents are put, and he has this, I brought out his little sense of humor where I say he looks at, his eyes twinkle and he tells his Guruma, don't worry, I will play for you again. It wasn't you, it was my stupid heart. And now that's mended. So that's where he was an unwilling pupil. He was a willing pupil to her, but he was an unwilling pupil at the akhada because his father was Pehelwan Sahab, much respected for the force of his arm as much as for his personality. And he wanted his son to carry on the lineage. But this boy wanted to play the flute, and he listened to the radio exactly as Jagjit and everybody else did, who didn't have teachers. till he found himself a teacher, you know.
Yeah.
And there's this lovely story which he told me about how in his neighborhood, when a teacher came to stay and he could hear little students going in and
This
out,
is Raja Ramji, wasn't it?
Raja Ramji,
Yeah.
he made sure that Raja Ramji heard him, because he would wander around in the vicinity of that house singing loudly the songs he knew, the bhajans or the film songs. And the wife used to, because they were childless, would call him and say, "Thoda halwa kha lo, thoda laddu banai kha lo," and he would happily eat all that and keep singing till Raja Ram said, "Chalo, I will teach you. Why don't you come and learn?"
Yeah.
And that is how his first musical initiation began.
He began as a vocalist, isn't it? He was a singer at that time. I
Yes,
think Raja
yes.
Ramji. Could you talk about, that's a interesting, that's a very interesting part about how Raja Ramji also realized as a guru that there was a certain limitation he had
Right.
to his voice, which sort of, I think, could you talk about that?
Yes, I mean, Shantanu, you are very well versed in classical music yourself. So you know that any singer needs to at least traverse the three scales, from lower pa to upper pa, if not further down and up. But he, unfortunately, Rajaram realized that the pupil was very quick. He grasped the music, he got the notes right, but he had only one octave to his voice. He could
Okay.
neither go higher, he couldn't go higher. But he had great breath control. And so he, I think, advised his pupil, I am not going to be able to teach you to sing, but if you can find an instrument, you have a good sense of music, use the breath, for the instrument. And Hariji says it so beautifully. He says, I looked for an instrument, and of course he had to do all this chupa chupa. He says, I picked up the flute because you can hide it easily. It uses my breath. It needs no tuning. It has no leather, no strings, nothing to maintain. It's just a piece of bamboo. And somehow it appealed to him. So he just picked it up.
That's quite something, to pick up an instrument with that kind of a approach, so and he was quite a handful as a young boy, wasn't he? Like he played truant, like he says that I didn't, of course, have to study very hard at school, because every time VIP guests would come, I would be asked to play the flute, and that would be my sort of passing yeah.
Grace mark.
Yeah, grace mark sort of thing, So, and could you sort of narrate a couple of incidents? Like I believe he ran away from home at a very early age and landed in Bombay,
Yes.
or there's this beautiful story about him following somebody playing a flute and then stealing that and running away from. Could you sort of bring that?
I heard that story online, actually, in an interview he gave for the NCPA, where he says he heard this boy playing the flute, and he said, "Itna sundar baja raha hai, is flute mein to kuch hona chahiye." So he followed him, listening to him like the pipe was followed. And when the boy put down the flute to drink water, he grabbed that flute and ran away. And he says the boy, of course, chased after him. He said, "Hey, mera flute, mera flute." But he knew all the gullies of Allahabad, and he just vanished without a trace. Now, whether the same tunes he could play, I don't know, because we buy mud violins. You remember when we hear these men playing, and when we try to play it, it was quack, quack. So I don't know whether he played it as well or whether he had to learn at that time. He doesn't tell us which part of his life this little theft happened. But he says it has no meaning. It did not shape me or anything. It was just a little boyish prank.
That's what, these are the kind of nuggets, like you get right interspersed right through the book, which sort of add a certain, they may not be sort of germane to the whole journey of the man, his music, but they add a certain certain color to his life, like the running away from home, and then coming back, having to come back. So could you talk? He was very young at the time when he ran away.
He was very young.
Why did he run away, and why did he have to come back? And that journey through, he comes back, and I think that's when he gets into AIR Kathak sort of as a, So could you talk about that as phase of his life a bit?
Yes. He runs away with his friend who is a singer. They both decide कि हम Bombay जाएंगे हम films में काम करेंगे, because he's got some proficiency with the flute and he believes that he has a future there, as every young person dreams, who has any talent. So they get into the train. Of course, they have no money, so they don't have a ticket. So they are in the third class, and whenever they see the ticket collector, they hide in the bathroom. So actually afterwards, you remember, Shantanu, he says we got caught.
Yes.
At one point, threw us out. He threw both of them out at some station, but he managed to get on, and the other boy, he found him waiting at another station because he had got on into another compartment. And they finally landed in Bombay, and they didn't know what to do. They were awed by the city. They landed up at some temple, and वहाँ पे खाना पीना तो मिल जाता था, on the condition that they would sing the bhajans in the evening. So they would lead. The boy would sing, Hariji would play the flute, and the bhajan mandali would sing along with them tunelessly or tunefully, we don't know. But in the daytime, they would go from studio to studio. Of course, nobody is going to look at two bedraggled little boys saying, "Humko film gaane hai ya film mein bajana hai." So after 3 days, they ran out of steam, and they quietly got back into the train and repeated their journey. And Hariji says with his characteristic humor, my father was so relieved to see me, he forgot to slap me.
So did his father sort of, his father seemed somebody like a hard taskmaster who'd probably have loved Panditji to take to the tradition of the akhada and, become a wrestler. How did Panditji manage that transition with his father and sort of, that must have been...
But he was a loving father. He was only very, very particular about the akhada, but he says कि हम लोग को बहुत खिलाते थे, पिलाते थे. He remembers the jalebis and the rabdi, and the way he was being spoilt by his father, he and his siblings. But I think the father, he managed to hide his playing, though he went to Rashtrapati Bhavan at one point as a student and played there. Luckily, there was no Twitter, there was no social media, there was no Doordarshan catching everything or OTT catching everything in the news. So there was no way the father found out that this boy had gone and played at Rashtrapati Bhavan or for radio programs for that matter, because the father never listened to the radio, didn't listen to children's programs. So he managed to hide it very well. Managed to find more teachers and hide his learning from them, pretending to be doing a job. First private company, then with a government organization.
He was a lower division clerk at...
Yes, and the father was very thrilled कि इसको तो government की नौकरी मिल गई, and he got rid of the akhada that way. He said, ठीक है, ये मिल गई तो वो छोड़ दो. So that he got rid of. And in the evenings, he would say, overtime hai, kaam bahut hai, ye hai, wo hai, and he would go to practice or learn. And he even gave his audition that way. So it is only when he got his job after the audition in Cuttack, and he had to move to Cuttack, that his father came to him. When he told him, मैं जा रहा हूँ, मुझे नौकरी मिल गई है All India Radio. So he says that for the first time, he saw tears in his father's eyes. He says, मैंने शादी भी नहीं की तुम लोगों के लिए, but you are leaving me now. He said, देखिए मुझे तो I'm getting more salary here. So he said, हाँ फिर ठीक है, जाओ, तुम तो वापस आ ही जाओगे. You will not be able to stay there alone.
One of the most fascinating aspects, part of the book, is his discipleship with Annapurna Devi.
Yes.
And it's obviously part that even now he is overwhelmed with, like the difficulty in getting her to accept him as a disciple, and the journey subsequently, like that's something that I found fascinating, that the getting of the true guru is as much a part of this whole journey. So could you talk about that? What was it that drove him to seek Annapurna Devi as a guru, and why was Annapurna Devi so reluctant, and then why did she sort of take him up, and that whole guru shishya relationship? Could you talk about that? That's I think the core of the book in many ways.
I think, Shantanu, sometimes destiny does things that you don't understand when it's happening. And I think I have realized in his life, he turned every bad turning into a level higher, how to take himself to a higher level. And one of the things that Destiny did was when he was a young boy and he was playing with his friend, the friend's father owned the hotel where Alauddin Khan, Baba Sahib, Baba Alauddin Khan used to come to perform in Allahabad. And he used to stay there and practice. And he saw this little boy playing and he said, come and listen to me. And then he said, sing with me. And he said, मैं गाता नहीं हूँ, flute बजाता हूँ. So he said, lao flute, लेके आओ, let's see. And he asked him to play. And of course, at that time, he had no fright. He didn't know how big a man was asking him to play. So he sang and he played. And Baba said, look, we were on different scales, but you kept your tune. Come with me to my hut. He suddenly saw the talent in this boy. He said, मेरे father को आप जानते नहीं हो. एक हाथ मारेंगे तो मैं खत्म हो जाऊंगा. I don't dare tell him. So then Baba told him कि आगे जाके तुम्हें कभी भी सीखना पड़े तो you go to my daughter. She is in Bombay. Annapurna Devi. She will teach you. Tell her I told. So that germ remained. And I think when he had done years of film music, and then Anuradha ji told him, his wife told him कि कब तक तुम पी पी पू पू बजाते रहोगे. Sanjeev Kumar told him, I don't see you as an accompanist. I see you as a player. So all this kind of fermented in his mind, and he said, चलो अन्नपूर्णा जी को ढूंढते हैं. So he takes himself off there to her house, and he says she said, no way, I'm not teaching you. And she was in the middle of her own tumultuous relationship with her husband. I think there was a divorce brewing. And she was planning to move away. So he goes back to her when she has moved away into her own house. And when he goes up, he says, I saw this closed door and it said, ring thrice and go away if the door is not answered. So he rang thrice many times and went away many times till one day the door was answered.
Okay.
And he refused it. She said, I don't have any time. You go to somebody who plays the flute. I play the surbahar. He says he did this, and Anuradha ji says he went without fail. For every week, every month he would go at least 2 or 3 times. Whenever the whim took him or the urge took him, and ring her bell and try and talk to her. And finally, he convinced her when she said, but I am a surbahar player, irritated. She had a temper like her father. He said, I haven't come to learn an instrument. I have come to learn music.
Yeah.
And that is where she realized this man is serious. And she said, "Theek hai, you sit and listen. I'm teaching my son, listen, and we'll see." So it was a 3-year journey for him to get accepted, but he never gave up.
Yeah, it took almost 3 years for her to sort of start teaching. And how long did this apprenticeship how long did he stay on with her for to learn
Well, he says he stayed on till her last day.
Okay.
But the active going, because he would go, she told him, don't give up what you're getting, the assignments, the filmy assignments. So he would finish his filmy assignments and go to her at 12 o'clock at night or 1 o'clock at night. Sometimes she would have food ready for him because he would not have had time to eat. And then they would sit down till 4 in the morning. And he would get 2 or 3 hours of sleep before he started his day again. So this process went on for at least 3-4 years, if I'm not wrong, where she taught him everything that she wanted to teach him about how to handle classical music, how to present it in the manner she wanted it presented, how to play his flute. He changed everything. He changed the flute that he played. He changed the scale that he played. he changed the direction he held the flute in to kind of signify and symbolize that here I am starting from scratch. I mean, that kind of dedication, I think any guru would not fail to
Yeah.
appreciate. I mean,
Absolutely, it's as much. It says as much about the guru as it does about the
yes,
shishya. Like to sort of have that sort of perseverance over that period of time.
yes,
You know,
yes.
the other aspect, and I think a lot of our listeners tuning in for this would like to know is Pandit just stressed with Hindi film music. I think it's got you've got this wonderful story he has with about S.D. Burman and Rashogolla. I think you narrated that in an earlier book too. So like if you could take us through that, and I think that should be where we sort of come into the uh, climax of this discussion, sort of his interest with Hindi film music, how that came about, his interest in Hindi film music, his influence, and of course leading up to his partnership with another pioneering
Yes,
artist, Shiv Kumar
yes,
Sharma ji.
yes. Well, I think his film music journey began in Katak because he used to accompany a lot of singers. I mean, he accompanied Suman Kalyanpur, Talat Mahmood, and he used to play his own little compositions. He had already emerged as a composer. He was composing for Oriya films along with another composer, well-known composer there. But when he was transferred to Bombay as a punishment posting, mind you,
Yeah.
transferred to Bombay, he kept hoping when all the greats used to come to play that they would notice him. But of course, they didn't notice him. They just took him as one more instrumentalist. They didn't realize he was playing his own genius tracks. But what happened was that somewhere, one day again, destiny knocked on his door. He got a call. They called him saying, "आपके लिए phone आया है," and there was a call for him saying, "Are you the person who plays the flute?" He said, "हाँ." So he says, "आप हमारे studio आ जाओ," and it was Sonic, Master Sonic, who was
Of
yes,
Sonic Omi of the
Sonic Omi, who became music directors themselves, he and his brother. But Master Sonic, who used to be the arranger and the organizer of Madan Mohan's music, who suddenly needed a flautist. So he managed to reach the studio, and he describes it so beautifully. He says they were all instrumentalists, mostly from Bandra or from East India or Goa, and they were all dressed in pants and suit. और मैं अपना धोती कुर्ता पहन के अपना झोला लेके उसमें 2 flute थे लेके पहुंच गया, तो they all looked at me very strangely, But when he played and they were doing Jahanaras, Fir Wahi Sham, and he with that, and there are beautiful flute passages in that which bring out the pathos of that song. And he says, after I finished, Madan Mohanji said, "Isko yahi rehne do. Let's call him, let's use him more," because he realized, people who are really into music recognize geniuses, recognize another fellow genius very easily. And he was immediately recognized, and that is how his career started off. And soon, Anuradha ji says he would play morning till night. He would sleep in the studio with a toothbrush in his bag, brush his teeth, wash his face, and go for the next recordings in the morning. And he would sometimes come home, his pockets would be full of money. He would just dump all the money on the bed and rush off to have his bath and run off again. So it was that kind of a life for quite a few years.
Yeah, and he was also a very integral part of S.D. Burman's
Yes.
group. So could you sort of give us an insight into that relationship? You've got wonderful stories about S.D. Burman and his sort of
as I wrote in my S.D. Burman book. He was still in AIR when this incident happened. That SDG was Burman Dada was recording a song, and of course he had to play the flute. So he came in late They were all sitting there already, and he came rushing from AIR, and he said, sorry, Dada, late ho gaya hai. So he said, Beto. Dada just, he was at this harmonium. He said, Bet jao. He sat down, and then Dada suddenly, little concerned, said, Kuch khaya hai? So he said, no, I have not had lunch, no time. मैं तो भागे भागे आया हूँ यहाँ. So somebody in the back of the house heard that, and soon there was a little dish of rasagullas which was produced and placed in front of, between Dada and him. So Dada looks at the rasagullas because these are very precious. They have come from Calcutta, and they are not meant for anybody. They are not meant for sharing. But ab rakha hai to rakha hai. So he says, "Khao." Hariji says, no. He tells everybody, "Khao." Of course, nobody is going to eat. It's rehearsal time, and you're not going to be stuffing rasagullas. So he says, "Nee, khalo." So Hariji takes one, and he eats it. Now, when you're hungry, and then rasagullas, you can't stop at one. So while the Dada is telling the others what to do, he is quickly gobbling up the rasagullas. And Dada is noticing but not looking at it. He's trying not to let his pain in his heart show. And he continues. And then it's over, the session is over. Hariji plays his flute and everything is over. And the next day he's called to rehearse with Lata. So he reaches there and Hariji says it himself कि मैं वहाँ पहुँचा. And Lata ji के साथ rehearsal चल रहा था, so I waited, and then he said, "अभी हरी जी आप बजाओ." So he played his bit, and he looked at Lata and he said, "Lata, कितना सुंदर, कितना मीठा बजाया." So Lata ji said, "वो तो हमेशा मीठा ही बजाते हैं." They had a very good rapport, Lata and they have a good rapport. So वो तो हमेशा मीठा बजाते हैं. So he said, नहीं, कल इतना रसगुल्ला खाया कि ज्यादा ही मीठा है आज. So he said he got his revenge, So.
And of course, how did this partnership with with Shiv Kumar Sharma ji happen? Like it went on to define Hindi film music for quite a period.
Yes.
And particularly they started out with somebody like Yash Chopra, like whose films were known for their music, and with Silsila, it sort
yes,
of
yes.
So can you just take us through that relationship with Shiv Kumar Sharma ji, and we'll talk about their classical music association also, but before that this film relationship.
Well, I think it was they had met earlier but passed each other by at the Talkatora Stadium, which was when Shivji had gone from his college and Hariji had gone to accompany some singers. But nothing happened there. But when they met at a studio, much later in Bombay, some kind of instant attraction happened. Hariji said, "I've never seen such a beautiful man." And Shivji said, "I've never seen someone so dedicated. We are all fooling around. He's sitting there and practicing during the intervals." So there was some kind of spark that generated a friendship that lasted very long. And it landed up because they would constantly discuss music in each other's homes. Their wives were friends. They would go out together. They would eat together. They also decided that they should work together in a classical composition. But to talk of film music, I think Yashji, listening to both of them, realized that here are two people who have a great rapport and who are able to create music spontaneously to fill in the interludes of the songs, and it works in tandem the way they create it. So he approached them and said, "Why don't you direct the music for my next film?" And it would take a long time for the next film to come, couple of years. Much would happen in between. But when Silsila was finally launched, it was Shiv Hari who became the music directors, and then the rest is history. They went on to do so many films which finally ended with that.
Yeah. And of course, they've got wonderful stories about some of these songs. Could you sort of bring us in? I think Chandni, he has got a memorable story about Chandni's, particularly the title song. If you could sort of narrate some of these. something that gives an insight into the bonding these two had and the feel for music and the fun they had creating, which sort of permeates the music also, because over from Silsila to Chandni, and the music had always had this new fresh appeal to. It never got jaded. It never felt like it was the same sort of thing. Something very fresh about it. So the relationship must have worked, and so there must be you must be privy to some stories around that, those films that they made together.
Well, I remember asking him, why did you make Sridevi sing? Because I find it a little jarring, that particular song, and I didn't imagine that somebody of his stature would do this. So he said, no, it came about that Sridevi offered. I want to sing. If Amitabh can sing, I can sing. Because he had made Amitabh sing rather well in Silsila.
Silsila, yes.
Yeah, so she said that, and they thought about it. If the heroine is planning to sing in the film, then she will be much more committed to the film, because she was she was at the top of her career at that time. So they said, okay. So the whole song was written, and the recording started, and that is when Sridevi also realized that singing is one thing when you're in the bathroom, but singing in front of a mic with instruments and keeping to tune and rhythm is another thing altogether. So then I think the first few takes were disastrous, and so they had to. Shivji says they fine-tuned the music to make it easier for her, to make it possible for her to carry the tune all the way through, and that's how they adapted to the voice. Yeah? So, but the song stayed.
Yes. Sort of one other aspect of their partnership, of their relationship in music, is the way Call of the Valley, wasn't it, that the album Call of the Valley?
Yes.
How that sort of defined in many ways the recording of Hindustani classical music, and how it became the big thing, albums became classical music albums became big with that. So, and there's a wonderful story to that also in the book. So could you sort of take us through that before we sort of wrap up with certain aspects of the writing?
Little bit there is of there are 3 chapters about this in the book, because there's so much to write, but I think the whole seed of this came from the fact that they were both playing instruments which were accompanying instruments.
Exactly. Both sort of went on to pioneer the thing about the flute and the santoor being independent leading instrument.
Solo instruments, and it was a kind of zid कि हम इसको करके ही रहेंगे, इसको दिखा के ही रहेंगे कि इसकी कैपेबिलिटी क्या है इस इंस्ट्रूमेंट की. And of course, for the flute, Pannalal Ghosh had done a little bit of pioneering work in bringing it to center stage. But he said, Hariji and Shivji decided कि हम classical गा के दिखाएंगे इसमें, कि solo it can be a classical performance can happen. And I think they went to HMV saying, हमें classical record बनाना है, and HMV kind of said, are you going to close shop for us or what? But finally somebody said, let us see what you can do. And then they got on the guitarist also, Kulbhushan, who came on as a slide guitar player, because again that is an instrument which is considered an accompanying instrument. Yeah. They got in the tabla and they created ragas. They created 4 ragas, 5 ragas, and at which point I think the real genesis of the success of this LP came in the form of a suggestion that why don't you create a storyline, a storyboard. And immediately Shivji says, I saw Kashmir, and I saw the brooks, and I saw the shaded trees and the chinar leaves dropping into the water, and that is how they started making. They made 2 morning ragas. They got the story of this young farmer taking his sheep in the morning and waiting for his beloved, and the beloved coming, and they play the instruments to create the drama. And then somebody is watching So the flute in that particular rag is the watcher. So he comes in suddenly, and everything scatters, and she runs away saying Sham ko milenge. And then it goes through meditative ragas and finally ends in Pahadi when they meet. And you can actually, in that dhun of the Pahadi, when you imagine them going away on a boat into the moonlight on the river, and the dipping of the oars and the lifting of the oars as a kind of refrain in the background. So that was the kind of music. And I remember myself listening to this music, this LP in somebody's house, and falling in love with it and saying, what is this? Because it's so approachable. You don't have to know anything about classical music to understand it or appreciate it.
Yeah.
So I went and bought that LP and I used to listen to it almost every day.
Yeah, it was almost like they had simplified classical music for the common man without sort of and in any way
showing off.
Yeah.
There was no showing off. It was a reaching out.
Reaching out.
It was reaching out.
Sathya, one last question. Like all your books, there is a structure to it which is different. It's not chronologically sort of a beginning, middle, and end. As I stated earlier, that you have broken the things into, there are certain interludes you have. It's almost like, and you have this approach to writing right from Guru Dutt, where you sort of, you did Guru Dutt's book in a certain manner, certain pattern of narrative. Then S.D. Burman was a much more sort of emotional journey, sort of, like him talking to the reader. So how do you sort of come about planning your structures for,
I think, you and I know, Shantanu, why S.D. Burman happened the way it was. A risk we took, and by God's grace it succeeded. That we wanted to do something different because there was a book already on S.D. Burman and there was another one coming. So how do you mine the same information again and again and make it interesting? So I think I took my love of fiction, my love of writing fiction, and transformed it into, of course, there I did a lot of research. I got a lot of research given to me also. And I got his own voice in his biography, which had been translated. So I wrote letters in his name. And I have lived in Calcutta, I've grown up in Calcutta. So for me, becoming a Bengali Babu was not so difficult. So I could think like he must have thought. So when I was told I have to write this book, I went with a book, a question-answer book by Zakir Hussain, saying, is this the format you want? And Pushpanjali and Hariji's son, they produced S.D. Burman, and they said, we want this structure. So I think that was a little bit which guided me. But then I found as I was writing, I found I was living in the present, because first of all, this is the first person who is alive whom I've written about. So I was constantly talking to him and listening to him. So I was thinking in the present tense. And when you're writing in the present tense, you can't write continuously because there are things in the past.
Yes.
So it automatically broke itself up into little interludes where the stories were so beautiful, they had to be told, but I couldn't stuff them into the narrative and expect them to shine. And also I wanted to make the book, I think I took a page from Call of the Valley, and instead of making it a tome, I wanted people who would be scared to pick up a book on a classical musician to be able to understand him, to be able to read the book easily. And it's something I learned in journalism, that the more snippets you use to give heavy material, the more palatable it is. So that's what I did. I just broke it up into little bite-sized pieces. And the stories are all there, but they don't sound like one long note. They are all little gems.
Yeah. Sorry, Shantanu, can we take a couple of questions from the
Absolutely.
audience?
I was just, that was just the last of my questions for Sathya. We can.
Thank you so much, Shantanu. Very quickly, Sathya, two questions that we have received from the audience. One is from Hans Jorgen, who is asking, does the book contain any reference to or quotes from Guruji's musical disciples, including in Europe and North America.
Yes, it does. It also has an interview with Stephanie Bosch, who is one of his um, long-standing disciples who has performed in India too, and a very beautiful story about how Amitabh ji in the audience imagines that she is an Indian girl, because she's dressed in a sari and playing classical music. Yes, it does have. It also has excerpts from his book, which is being used as a textbook in Rotterdam.
Yeah. And the next question is from Archana, who is asking, how writing the story of a musician shaped your own understanding of music?
Oh, very, very much, very much. Because as you, first of all, you understand that music is a sea, is an ocean, and when you see the journeys of all these musicians that I have written about, you realize it's an unending journey. So it teaches you patience. It teaches you about music, because when he's talking about changing his style, or when I went to the Gurukul and his students told me how he teaches them, and he gives them the freedom to interpret, take, take three notes. I think we've lost.
No. I think there was some interruption, but you go ahead.
So how he tells them, take three notes and come back with some innovations. So when I hear about these things, I understand more about how different gurus teach. Usually it's all by rote, but here is a guru who brings out the genius of his students, the talents of his students. So yes, it did enrich me immensely.
And you also said the man and the music are one and the same. So
yes,
understanding the man also gives you an insight into his music.
Rightly said, yes.
And just one last question from my side. Did they ever feel, Shantanu asked about the Shiv-Hari combination. So I was wondering, did they ever, or did they tell you ever that they had a moment of doubt or crisis while playing for films, that they are in a way compelled to compromise on their classical background, etc.?
See, in Hariji's case, he was not really a classical player at that time. He had training, but he was playing only in the studio. So he was only an accompanist all through, and whatever he played on his own was for himself, or when he was invited to some event to play. So he was basically, there was no, they never thought of it as this is lesser than that. Music was music. It's only when Anuradha ji told him that how much of these little 2-minute, 2-second interludes are you going to play? When are you going to develop yourself as a singer? Because she's a classically trained singer. When are you going to develop yourself as a fully trained musician? That it struck him that there is another aspect that he can pursue. So I don't think they ever thought of it as only film music.
Yeah. Thank you so much. Any last words, Shantanu?
No, it's like I can't wait for Satya's next book. Like it's always and one of the most interesting aspects is to sort of think of the structure she'll come up for the next one, because that's always a sort of.
Is something lined up, Sathya?
Sorry?
Is something lined up?
Well, I have a couple of ideas. I still have to find publishers who will say yes.
I think with your kind of
music, yes.
with your kind of track record, I don't think there would be publishers unwilling to publish.
No, but my love of old film music is what comes in the way. People want chatpata stories.
Yeah. Thank you so much. This is indeed a chatpata session. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Shantanu, thank you for doing this. And Satya, thank you very much for this session. You gave us a beautiful insight into Guruji's music and his personality, and how the two actually blend together to create the man he is. As you rightly said, he's a national treasure. And in this day and age, we have very few of them, and we should treasure them. Thank you so much, Sathya, for giving us a wonderful session in the morning. Thank you so much. Shantanu, thank you very much for doing
Vijayji, I want to just say that there is a special offer on the book.
I have conveyed that in the chat box, Sathya. That for the audience of HLF, the author Sathya Saran is offering a 40% discount on the book, and they can get in touch with us for further inquiries. Thank you so much, both of you. And with this, ladies and gentlemen, we bring a close to the first session of day 2, and the next session will start at 11. Thank you so much, and we look forward to you in the next session. Thank you very much, Sathya and Shantanu. Thank you.
పున్నాము వెన్నాల కోలు పూసి కాసిందే కోలు
పున్నాము వెన్నాల కోలు పూసి కాసిందే కోలు
నీరు నిమ్మల కింద గన్నెర్ల కింద వంగి పూలే రంగ కొంగందుతూనే వంగి